Welcome to Trained Up, a podcast where we train up in the Word so that we may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. My name is Luke, a seminary student and aspiring pastor, and with me, as always, is my mom.
That's right. I trained him up.
So this week we are looking at Philippians 4:13. Why are we looking at that this week?
Well, we're looking at that because it's probably one of the most misused verses in the Bible. It's just applied to everything, and it really shouldn't be. But I will say, I feel it's like also one of the most encouraging verses in the Bible. What do you think about that, Luke?
I also think it's encouraging, but we'll get into why that is as we discuss probably the application of the verse. But let's read it. Let's read it before we get into it. So Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Okay, so when people misuse this, how do they misuse this? What do they use it for? What are they saying? What do they want? What do people want this verse to be communicating?
I mean, I really feel like people just apply it across the board. Like, you know, I can do all things because I can fly if I want to. I can accomplish anything. I can accomplish anything even if it's not, godly. I can do it all. I think people just want to be able to do what they want to do, and so they apply this verse just across the board. So if you're struggling with anything, it's like, what do they call that? That positive self-thinking, self-talk. I can do all things. I can do all things. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't even add the second part of the verse. They just say, I can do all things.
I don't know about that one, but
I've heard that. I've heard, like, they're just assuming the rest. Like, they assume that you know the rest. So they're like, I can do all things. Yeah. But I think it's important to add that second part of the verse.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of key.
Well, yeah, that's the only way that you can do this. Yeah, I mean, in the competition of what is the most tattooed Bible verse in history, I mean, this has got to be top 5, at least, if not the most tattooed Bible verse I've ever seen. I have seen so many of these tattoos.
Yeah.
I've seen at least 5. I know at least 5 people.
5 people
with these tattoos
in your life have this tattoo?
5 people in my life. I'm saying this, and I'm leaving it in because you're looking at me like I'm crazy.
5 people in your life have this tattoo.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone really with this tattoo.
Do you know a lot of people with tattoos?
That might be the problem.
Okay, well, here we go.
My generation doesn't have a lot of tattoos.
This is a lie. Your people don't have tattoos.
No, my generation.
No.
We have fewer tattoos than your generation.
I will agree to that.
The only reason you don't have a tattoo is because you don't like pain.
You're right. I'm scared. I am a chicken. That is why I don't have tattoos.
Which also might be the reason I don't have tattoos at this point. But I'm saying...
Get a big old face tattoo.
Ouch. I'm saying generationally. So this is why I don't know anybody with this tattoo.
So now that you're done coming at my generation for apparently having too many tattoos.
I'm not coming at your generation. I'm saying generationally, it's a bigger thing now than it was when I was young.
Maybe. I
didn't know a whole lot of people getting tattoos when I was young, especially Bible verses tattoos, but maybe that's because I was traveling in the wrong circles.
I will say probably in your childhood, people who would get a Bible verse tattooed would not get a tattoo.
Right.
Because, like...
It was taboo.
It's kind of recent that we've been like, maybe tattoos are fine.
Right.
Anyway, what I'm trying to communicate with this tattoo thing is that this is used more as like a proverb or a maxim of society in the way that you're saying. In like people are taking it to say, I can be an Olympic swimmer.
You can't though. Well, you can if you know how to swim and you've trained and you've worked at it. Yeah. You know, God's given you those gifts. But me personally, I'm not waking up tomorrow and saying I can do all things through him who gives me strength, and I'm not going to go to the pool. I can't even stick my head under the water.
That's true. That is unfortunately very true.
But that is how people apply it.
Yeah, that's what people use it for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or if trouble comes, like let's say some trouble is coming my way, somebody says something against me, and speaks out against me or whatever, I can say, listen, I don't care what they say about me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
And you're saying that's not related to what the verse is saying.
I'm not saying that. You asked
Okay.
me how people are using it.
That is how people are using it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like someone's coming against you. It's kind of a, you know what, I'll show you response. Like you say I can't do this, well guess what?
Oh.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Okay, so you're saying they're using it kind of in like a backbiting way. They're
Right.
Okay.
I'll show you.
Yeah, I'll get you.
Well, I'm not going to get you, but I'm going to show you
Sure.
that I can do whatever you say I can't do.
Okay. Okay, yeah. No, I get that. That's,
Like a prideful way.
yeah. And that's not very consistent with the rest of what the Bible tells us about pride. So that's probably not a great way to take this verse.
No, but it's how people use it.
Yeah.
I think it's when you go, I mean, those are the biggest ways I've heard it used is, listen, I can do anything, really. Literally, I can do anything because of this verse.
Yeah.
And then also, really? You say I can't do something? Well, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Because I can do all things.
Do him who
No, you
strengthens me.
just stop it there.
The second part is the only active part of the verse, so we need that. But I get what you're saying. People stop it there because they're implying the rest of it. But I think this is a shifty way to really say what you're not saying.
Which is,
Or-
I think you are saying. I think when people use it that way, they are saying, "I can do all things."
No, that's what I'm saying. They're like it's a cover of
Yeah.
that, and then if you press that, they would immediately be like,
Well,
"Oh
of
no,
course.
you know the rest of the verse."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So let's get into the context. My favorite
what is
part,
the context?
always. So Philippians, it's another letter. We talked about a letter last week. This is another letter from Paul. It's another Pauline letter. Paul is writing to the Philippian church. On the whole, this is one of the more positive letters from Paul. He doesn't have a lot that he's chastising the Philippians about. He's really thankful that they're doing so well and that they are striving in the faith so well. And maybe as a result of that, Philippians is kind of a really scattered letter. So he just he touches on a lot of different things in this letter. And in kind of a weird way for Paul, it's not in really any particular order either, which actually helps this, I think, is one of the problems that can help this book lead people into this proof texting kind of thing, which is where you take a verse and you just take that and you use it to prove something. Kind of like we're saying is being done with this verse. Because it's so scattered, it's easier to do that with, because the context itself doesn't quite help shore up like the meaning quite as well as it would in Romans or 1 Corinthians, like we talked about last week. It doesn't quite help you as much. So it's more of a scattered book, but Paul is still the author, and we're still talking about the deeper things of theology. Paul gets into those deeper things in all of his letters because he's writing to churches, to believers, people who should be more mature in the faith, and these people he obviously believes are. And so he believes they'll be able to understand him rightly. All of that to say, the immediate verses preceding this verse are vital to this verse. Because, ripped out of its context, as Dr. Bachman would say, kicking and screaming, you could apply this verse. Like, I can get up one day and I want to be an Olympic swimmer. I want to be a professional basketball player, whatever.
I want to put a cape on and I will be Superman.
Yes. You could say that. Like, you could say, well, that's what this verse means. And then, if I'm trying to be critical, right, if I'm critical of Scripture, then I'll say, well, hey, this says I can do all things, but clearly I can't.
Right.
And so Scripture can't be true. Right? So either way, we could get off into the weeds here. So I'll just read just verses 10 through our verse.
Okay.
So just those 4 verses. Just so we have the whole context as we go into that section. So verse 10 says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Now that I am speaking, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And so there's a huge difference, right? And you can feel that even if I just read verse 12, right? There's a huge difference. If I read you verses 12 and 13 and said, what does it mean? And if I just read you verse 13 and said, what does it mean? We can see where we've gotten off the track here.
Right.
Because verse 12 is so vital to what Paul's saying in verse 13.
I would say that's true, for sure. What's after it?
After it says, yet it was kind of you to share my trouble, and you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. So this is the last part of Philippians, and he's going to start closing his letter. And what he's going to do right after it, and actually it's what he started to do in 10 and 11, is thank them for their willingness and their aid to him on his missionary journeys.
As he does what?
Spreads the gospel.
Right. I think that's really important here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is sandwiched in between there, right? So
Correct.
This is clearly part of that.
Yeah, so I think the after and the closing is important as you follow up this verse as well. Because
Sure.
I believe that is key to even understanding this verse. You know, what kinds of things can I do? It's really, these things are falling under the will of God. So the will of God is for him to spread the gospel, and that's important. It's, to me, that's the sum of the all things. You know what I mean? That's one of the things that's included there. So it's not only about being content in all circumstances, which is the verse directly before, but it's about literally doing all things under the will of God. And the will of God for Paul is that he is spreading the gospel. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's important as well.
Yeah.
You know, the whole section
Sure.
is also about spreading the gospel, and the closing after.
And you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this verse in its context that hardly ever gets talked about. I'm sure it's preached on when this verse is preached on, but we don't usually talk about it in connection with this verse. Is what Paul is. So Paul is saying, usually, even when we're trying to interpret it rightly, we say, oh, I can go through hard things. I can endure hardships. I can get through calamities, whether they be personal or so like broader than that. I can get through things. But Paul has placed on that same level wealth and abundance. So on the same level as prison and hardships and hunger is prosperity and wealth. And he's saying, I can endure all of these things. I can endure both the highest and the lowest because of Christ. And there's something that this phrasing sounds strange to me. And like, I think most people ears will prick up at that. Because we're like, why is he saying he has to endure good things? Why is he saying he has to endure wealth, prosperity?
That makes total sense to me.
Abundance. Okay. Why does that make sense to you? Because when I say it doesn't make sense to me, it's not that I don't understand what he's saying.
Right.
It's that I think my natural inclination, and I think a lot of people's natural inclination, is why would that need to be endured? That's a good.
I think it's about persevering through that, having abundance, having wealth and prosperity. You don't necessarily know it till you're there, but once you're there, there are a whole slew of temptations that come with that you don't necessarily have when you're not wealthy and prosperous. There are a whole lot of there's a intense loneliness also that comes with that, because you're never, really sure, are people my friends because of my wealth, or are people, loving me and are my friends because of, they like me. So and then there's a whole lot of temptation with pride. You fall more easily, I think, into, well, I've earned this, I've worked hard for this, I'm, very worth having all of this. And even pride in that, well, God must be just blessing me because I'm really doing well and he's really happy with me. And so he's just blessing the socks off of me, with wealth. So I think there are temptations that come along with that he's saying you really need to persevere and you really need to fight through. Because it's a battle, that's a sin battle that doesn't exist when you don't have the wealth and when you don't have the prosperity at that degree. It's more difficult. It's more difficult, I think.
Yeah.
To fight the pride and to fight those
Sure.
temptations of that are just coming at you, that wouldn't necessarily come at you if you didn't have the prosperity and the wealth.
Yeah.
Temptations to overspend, temptations to become more selfish in your, spending, and more self-focused in your thinking, and then obsessed with money, and now all of a sudden we're, idolizing money. So I think there's a perseverance that comes with that too. That's how I interpret that.
Yeah, and I would interpret it the same way. I think two things. One is, Paul is saying that really, this is one thing, but Paul's saying that the height and the depth are equivalently hard to go through.
Right.
And on the one hand, we can say, I choose the height. Can I pick one? Because that feels better for us. We think that's better. On the other hand, I think that one of the things that it does suggest is that these circumstantial things don't make life easier.
No.
They don't. This is not the answer to our issue, is to solve these circumstantial problems of where we stand in society, whether that be in like a what is my title way, or how much money do I have, what kind of house do I live in. Mm-hmm. No matter what way, that's not the answer to, that doesn't make it easier necessarily. And I think that Paul equating that is helpful, because I think that either side of this line will throw, no matter where you are on the line, really, even if you're close to the middle of this mm-hmm. split, we like to throw dirt at whoever we think is on the opposite side of that line, right? Because from the kind of, we'll say, more destitute side, the poorer side, the less fortunate side, you'll throw things, say like, oh yeah, cry me a river, you have all this, all these things, and you're lonely, right? But the other side will throw back like, well, you don't do anything. I worked hard for that, like, mm-hmm. And so we sling dirt at each other like this. And Paul's saying this seems to be like, no, they're both hard. Mm-hmm. And that's like, there's something that I think we can remember then in both situations, no matter where we stand. And before we start slinging those insults and that dirt at other people, to think about, what spot they're in and how that's affecting them, and how that might be, something we should think about before we start attacking.
So, would you say then that this verse is primarily about contentment, basically in any circumstance, perseverance through any circumstance. Would you say that?
Yeah.
I would also say it also is about sharing the gospel because of the surrounding context. So I think that this verse, Paul is saying, we can persevere through difficulties in any circumstances that we're in. We can be content in any circumstance we're in. But the will of God is for me to share the gospel. And the will of God for all of us, as commanded in his word, is to share the gospel. And so we can also do those things through Christ, who strengthens us.
Sure. Yeah. So, full context, right? All of this is written from Paul's perspective. He is saying, right? He outlined. He said, I'm glad that you folks want to help me and supply my need. You were very helpful to me when I was there. I thank you for that. Not that I needed that, because I know that no matter what I face, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And then he continues on in his, but you're very helpful and you've helped me before, and I know that the only reason you haven't helped me recently is because you didn't have an opportunity to, yada, yada, yada. And he'll go on to close the book this way. And we can say that this applies to us, not because Paul says that here, but because Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And so we see that this is a thing that Paul has done and says he has. And we can easily see how this is, admirable to be imitated.
Right.
And so, yes, his specific mission is to be, I would say probably at least in the top 10 missionaries of all time. Probably more important than that. But this is his mission, to go to all these churches and to do this. And in this mission, he's going to get beat up a lot, and he's going to get in prison a lot.
Right.
And he's going to face those hardships. But there's also times where he stays with Lydia, someone who I'm sure lives in what for the time must have been a great house. They must have had plenty of food. So he also is experiencing some of that too. Maybe rarer, I don't know. But it depends on where he's going. And so he's saying in this journey, like you said, in sharing the gospel and doing what God's commanded me, these circumstances will change. And I think our passage is saying there is always in life this variable and this constant. And the variable is what your situation looks like. What are my circumstances? So that variable, and in one lifetime, that variable can look drastically different at different times. Can all the way up, all the way down, wherever
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It changes constantly.
Right. It looks drastically different and changes constantly. And not just, I'm kind of leaning on the wealth thing here, but not just that. I mean, we think about now, Christmas time, a lot of people think about, relatives that they've lost and other hardships that they've gone through. And so you think about even these hard things that sometimes happen in life. This changes the circumstance of our life. And that's a variable that's going to go all over the place. And we can't control that.
Right.
We trust that God's sovereign in that God has his hand in that, and he's working all things together for the good of those who love him. Right? We trust that. But the constant is always contentment.
Yes. The constant is contentment. But that's not very easy. I mean, let's just get down to the nitty gritty here.
Okay.
It
is the application section of our podcast.
Is complicated. I think just as human beings, our minds just go directly to, if good things are happening, I must be viewed as good. If good things are happening to me, I must be doing something right. If bad things are happening to me, I must be doing something wrong. And so then contentment becomes really complicated because you're constantly thinking, well, I must be doing good or I must be doing wrong, and I've got to, fix that. When really life is just happening, it's just playing out. And sometimes, the sin in our own lives, the sin in other lives, sometimes just God's plan can be complicated and difficult for us. And what we see on this side of heaven is not good. It's not always good. It's hard. It's complicated. It's difficult. But, when we get to heaven and when we are in the presence of God, we will no longer have many of the issues that we have here, or any of them. And so I think it's just a matter of what we're looking at. Do you know what I mean? Are we thinking, okay, this is happening to me, and therefore I must have fallen out of God's graces, or I must need to fix something, and then you're just not content because you feel like you just need to fix something in order for the good stuff to be happening to you. So it's really complicated, this contentment. So something bad comes up, something difficult, something hard with you, with your family, anything. It's immediate drop in your contentment level. Yeah, I think it's hard to be content in difficult circumstances. But Paul is saying, I can do all things. Can you read that verse again, please?
I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
Okay. It says, I love, and maybe you can help me out with this, with the whole language thing, but through is an important word to me in this verse, because it's not with, it's through. Through is important because that means that you are completely intertwined with Christ. So I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So he's strengthening me as we're doing these things that he's called us to do together.
Right.
It's through him. We cannot do these things without him. It has to be through him who strengthens me. So that's important.
Yeah, and this might be an aside that I take out, but it might not be. I think that this is like a good moment, though, to think about taking this verse in the way that I think people have taken it, in the offensive, we might say, side of I can actively do all things, right? And we can think about this idea of like, okay, well, doesn't Jesus say, like, you could say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and it will do it? Like, Jesus seems to say all these things about, like, if you pray for this, it'll happen. He seems to say that we have some kind of agency there, some kind of ability there. So why does that not play out? I can't be the only kid who was like, I should probably test this out just to see. Because that's not how it works. As a child, I could not say to a mountain, get up, and it didn't get up. But that's because we've misunderstood the requirement there. And we've thought, oh, Jesus is giving me license to, I don't know, telekinetically, somehow magically move a mountain. That's not what he's saying. Jesus is saying, when we ask for what seems monumental, something monumental, and it's in God's will, it will happen, no matter how monumental the task is. And this is also what Paul's saying. Paul's saying, I can be content through him, because it's not Paul that has some kind of magical guru ability to be calm in every situation, to be content in every situation. That's not coming from him. He doesn't have the power. It can only be Christ who, through him, allows that contentment to flourish, allows God's peace to be with Paul, no matter where that circumstance dial is at the moment.
And the strengthening comes, the strengthening to endure, the strengthening to pursue or persevere, the strengthening to be content.
Right.
That's where that comes from.
Yeah.
But if you're not walking in lockstep with Christ, and you're just going through life trying to do your own thing, trying to gain more, be more, do more, this American dream, this go, go, go. If that's your goal, if that's all you think about, and you're not walking in lockstep with Christ, you're not in his word, you're not caring about the things of Christ, you're not pursuing the things of Christ, you're not seeking out more time for prayer and being in the word, seeking out opportunities to share the gospel, even seeking out the will of God and not just pursuing your own interests and your own dreams and your own desires, that's not walking in lockstep with Christ. So you won't be content.
Right.
You will not persevere through the hardships of life. You will be extremely downtrodden. I mean, and maybe not. Maybe you have all this wealth in the world, but there's an intense loneliness that might come with that. There's other issues that might come with that, or nothing has happened to you in this life that would make you sad yet. Believe me, it's coming. But every one of us has
one person.
Every one of us eventually has some sorrow that touches us, and so. But if I'm not walking in lockstep with Christ, then the strengthening does not come. And that, to me, is scarier than the things that could happen to me. It is scarier for me to think of having to walk through these situations that I know are coming or have come in the past, and I won't have Christ to strengthen me. That is devastating. That's a devastating thought. I don't know how people do it that don't have Christ, how they get through these really, really difficult circumstances. It's just terrifying to me. So I think that's a big roadblock for contentment, is if you're not walking in lockstep with Christ, if you're not in the Word, having a relationship with Him in prayer, and seeking out His will on a regular basis, desiring to do His will on a regular basis, I don't think the strengthening comes. And then you have extreme discontent.
Part of my problem is, I think even that then doesn't that kind of make this lean towards, this is a work of mine, that my walking in lockstep with God has allowed God, or encouraged God rather, to strengthen me in this way. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying at all. I don't think that's what you're saying. I'm saying, can I construe it that way?
I'm sure you can construe it that way.
Can I say that? And then I think that there's a lot of times where, in God's grace and mercy to me that is undeserved, a lot of times, most times even, I'll say, when I have the least amount of contentment, I am what seems like dragged back in a way that is beyond me to that focus, to that lockstep. Like, I don't know that in that moment I would think, you know what, I got to recenter, I got to get back in the Word, I got to get back in prayer, I got to get back and recenter myself. But it almost feels like you're dragged into that. And I agree with you that this is what will help strengthen. And this is what, God uses principally His Word as well as prayer and other saints around us to strengthen us for those hard times. But I think that also, when I have a bad attitude, it doesn't stop Him from dragging me back to that.
Sure. But the point is, he's dragging you back to that. And so,
sure,
yeah, a lot of that is just the grace and mercy of God. I mean, your salvation alone is the grace and mercy of God.
Agreed.
So you wouldn't have any of this without Christ, without God's grace and mercy.
Right.
But I do think there's also a part where we are involved. I mean, we are told to work out our salvation and to work on, sanctification,
Yeah.
becoming more like Christ. So there's a piece that's ours. And we can't ignore that and just say, oh, we got to sit back and just wait for God to drag us back.
No.
We are responsible to be obedient to him. And in that is that strengthening.
Yeah.
There will be times where we just, are completely self-absorbed and discontent, and he does drag us back. That's just his immense mercy and love for us, and I'm extremely grateful for that too. But I don't think we can just completely ignore our responsibility in this.
I agree. Yeah, what I'm not trying to imply is that we abandon ship because it's going down. Well, we might as well just be bitter, right? And until God brings us back. That's not what I'm saying. And it's not important that we keep up these things. It absolutely is. And if you want help staying content, this is the blueprint. Stay trained up.
Right.
Don't slack on that, because you're absolutely right. Walking in lockstep with Christ is how we can maintain that.
Right.
What I'm saying is, or what I'm trying to dissipate is this fear of losing that step and then losing the strength.
Mm-hmm. I think that I really do believe that it can happen. I've seen people in life who have become completely bitter and are just, I don't feel that they've lost their salvation, because I don't believe that's possible, but they are bitter and there is no contentment, and there hasn't been for years. And so I think you can, that can be a result of not walking in lockstep with Christ, not spending time in the Word and in prayer and with other believers that are encouraging you, And it's not that God is not sending other believers into your path to say, hey, you can be more strengthened when you stay closer to Christ, and when you're concerned about his will and not yours. There's plenty of people saying this, but this discontentment has taken root.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. So I'm looking at this from the 1,000-foot perspective of my life. If I'm saved, God will deliver me from my own bitterness. It will happen. If I have to die to make that happen, that might be true.
Right.
If that comes to the end, that comes to the end. Could I have absolutely lived a much better way and had a much better life, and a life where I truly felt contentment and I could get there? Sure. It was my job. I made the bitterness. It's me that made that bitterness and that hardness to life. It wasn't God that put it there. And any relieving he did of that would be a mercy to me. Right? But I think that if we're saved, maybe it takes years, but I think that God will bring us around. And like I said, that might not come until death, but I promise you then it'll come.
Right. Oh, sure. We can't be standing in the presence of God with bitterness in our heart.
And all of a sudden, I think, you'll find that these things you were bitter about don't actually matter all that much. Because all of a sudden, you'll be like, what on earth was I bitter about? Why was I angry? But what I'm saying is, I think you're right in saying, listen, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It is our job. We need to get in there. Let's not be passive about this when we can be active, when we can do things to strengthen ourselves in Christ.
And I'm saying the more passive you are, the less strengthened you are.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, anybody's like that.
Sure. So,
the more that,
and the more active you are
if you're not ready
in your faith,
Yeah.
the more strengthened you are
right.
in the circumstances of life and in your contentment. I think this is a definite
Yeah.
prescription.
So if we think about right, and we'll take it's like really easy, right? We think about in First Peter when Peter says, the enemy is prowling around like a lion, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between a guy who knows there's a lion in this grass and a guy who does not know there's a lion in this grass.
Yeah.
They act very differently, and one of them is going to get eaten first
Right.
because he doesn't know that there's a lion in this grass.
Okay, so it's really about perseverance,
Yeah.
contentment, and
Correct.
I'm going to add sharing the gospel.
Okay.
And so,
Well, most of the Bible is about sharing the gospel.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of a Sunday school answer, so I agree.
Excuse you. This is, I mean,
Jesus.
because it's in there. You know what I
it's
mean?
fine. I see
Before
what you're
and
saying.
after the context is saying
A little bit of eyes to Jesus, but I see what you're saying.
what?
Maybe we're shoehorning something in.
Forget it. Take it out. Anyways, it's not about being able to just do whatever you want to do.
Correct.
It's about having the strength to persevere, to be content, and to do the will of God. It all falls under the umbrella of what is within the will of God. And if you don't care about what's in the will of God, that's a problem. And you're only caring about what you can do and what you can get and all of that. Contentment is really difficult in those circumstances.
I agree.
In all things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I don't think it's easy. But
it's not easy at all. It's not easy.
this is
Life is hard.
part of the good gifts that we are given.
And I say you have to be walking in lockstep with Christ to even have the strength to do that, to be content.
And I say they're free.
And you say, what?
The gifts are free.
The gifts are indeed free. But if you're not in Christ, if you're not walking in step with Him, you're not going to feel that strengthening.
Probably. I don't know that I can say it definitively. I can say it probably.
How can we do all things through Christ who strengthens us then? The through word there is a problem.
I
then.
agree that it's always God doing it. I agree with you. I think that you're right. On our side of the line here, if what we ought to do is to walk in lockstep with Christ, is to do all that we can to stay in His
Will?
yes, to stay in His will, to stay in the Word, to stay in prayer, to continue down that road, because that's going to put us in the best position possible to be content no matter what we're hit with. Mm-hmm. I entirely agree with you.
So what would you say are the three greatest blocks to contentment in your life? Name one, anything that is a block to contentment in your life.
Probably the biggest one for me of the ones I remember you mentioning is fear.
Fear of
Just fear. What do you mean fear of?
I don't know, just fear of life, fear of trouble, fear of people,
Yeah.
all the
I
above.
would say so. A combination of I am not convinced that the rest of my life is going to work out as well as the first part has. So I am fearful of what those hardships look like for me. And so in that fear, I'm no longer content because I'm no longer trusting God that He has a plan and He is going to work out His good will in my life, which ultimately is what I want, right? That's what I would assent to saying I would love for Him to do that. That's, I would say that truthfully. But at the same time, I think that fear of when we realize that this world is not good, that this world has many things that are painful and evil and unjust, then we can start to say, and that Christ, though he saved me, he saved my soul, and he changed my life, right? He allows me to live for him now. Does not say ever that he's going to spare me of those things.
Yeah, in this world you will have trouble.
Right. In fact, he makes it clear that some of those things are going to hit me. Hopefully not all of them, but some of them are definitely going to hit me. And so I think and I think I'm in error to think this way. I don't think this is true. I don't think you, listener, person, anybody should think this way. But I think it can lead to us being fearful of what that means for us, what those trials are going to mean for me, for my family. And so that would make me fearful.
And so that's a roadblock to contentment for you.
Sure.
Right? But how encouraging is it to know that even in those times, he's going to strengthen you.
Right.
You know, he's going to walk with you through those times and give you encouragement, surround you with people who love you, who come to your aid, you know, because he's leading them to do so. And just the fact that he's going to strengthen you through that's huge. That's a very encouraging thing. He's going to give you the power really to persevere through those things that you wouldn't have on your own. Yeah. That's so encouraging.
Yes, and it is encouraging, and we ought to be able to face that. Will help us face those things. I agree.
Yeah, and walk through them. So I would say my biggest roadblock to contentment is probably a desire for comfort. Just, a desire, I've been through some hard things and I'm getting tired. So I'm thinking like this contentment, but what I'm really searching for when I'm doing that is heaven, is being able to, have that comfort and that contentment in the presence of God. But I'm wrongly searching for it in this world. So life is not going to ease up just because I'm tired, and because I've been through some stuff. It's this side of heaven is going to be difficult. And so, but again, this verse is encouraging to me because again, it's saying through the power of Christ, I will be strengthened even in those difficult times. And I can say over and over in hardships I have suffered throughout life, that has been so important. And I have leaned in so heavily to that I'm even at the point now where I would say I would not want that to have not happened to me. That feels like a triple, quadruple negative. But you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't choose for that not to have happened to me because of how close it brought me to Christ in those moments, and just being able to recall back to those times. Wow, he got me through that. He strengthened me through that. There is no way I could have done that on my own. And here I stand still, seeking the will of God, seeking, how can I walk closer with God? How can I become more like Christ? So even though I'm searching for this comfort, I know that in times past it has brought me so much closer to God. To not have the comfort.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm still seeking it, and every time I get sucked into that, it's just discontentment.
And I mean, I think that both of these things, whether it's comfort or fear, the reason why it's there is actually a correct intuition that there's something woefully wrong with the world that we live in.
Right.
There's something scary about the world. There's something uncomfortable about the world. And it ought to feel safe and comfortable. There's something in us that says it ought to feel that way. Because that's actually correct. that sin has marred the world in such a way that what should have been comfortable and safe is now terribly unsafe and terribly uncomfortable.
Right.
And so it's right that we long for that, but like everything else, it ought to be in perspective. We know that we've been guaranteed that at the end.
Right.
As long.
And so if you are feeling safe and comfortable in this world, you probably
That's
need
not
to
a
do a
good
little self-examination,
Yeah.
because then you belong to this world way more than you should. So, the question we have for
what's our
our
question?
listeners, if there's anyone still out there holding on at this
59
point.
minutes and 52 seconds.
Wow. Here's the question. What keeps you from being content? Like, what seems to be your roadblock?
What's the hang-up?
I'm going to give you 3 choices.
Oh, okay.
Is it your
You don't get to
desire
choose.
for comfort?
Comfort.
Is it your desire for importance?
Do you want to be special?
And you don't feel people are saying you're special.
Because when everyone's special.
Nobody's
is.
special.
It's also
Or
from
number
a movie.
3, is it fear? Fear of whatever.
That's mine.
So those are I would say the top 3. What one are you? That's what we want
Fear.
to know from our listeners. I already know. You already answered.
Yeah, I
you
was
don't
gonna
get
say,
to
we already
answer
said this.
twice. Do you think you're special
You
or something?
look at me and say, what one are you?
You are special, Luke. You're my special son.
Oh, boy.
So, anyway, we want to hear
That's
from
the
our
question.
listeners.
You can.
And if there's something that doesn't fall into those 3, give us that too.
Whatever you want to say to us at any time, you can email the podcast at traineduppod@gmail.com or comment on the YouTube videos. I don't think you can comment on Apple Podcasts.
No,
So don't comment there because you can't.
you can't.
But it would be great if you liked and subscribed to whatever you're listening on. And I think if you rate the podcast, it helps the podcast numbers.
I don't want to be rated. I feel
I would like to be rated.
Okay.
I want to know
right.
how many stars out of 5 that you give me, because I would like
I
to
don't really
base
care.
my worth
Yeah.
on the amount of stars that you give
Okay,
me.
all right. So Luke is suffering from a lack of self-worth here. So if you could just give him some stars,
Don't
maybe
give
he'll
me
feel
pity
better
stars.
about
Don't
himself.
give me pity stars.
I don't
I want
know.
real stars.
Anyway, I have to say this. I have felt extremely blessed by people who have even personally texted or
It's
emailed.
true.
Some comments, some thoughts, some discussions that have come up from this podcast. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate when people text or want to have discussions about it. In person, I've had many discussions with people about the podcast. So,
Which is great.
and yeah, that's a real blessing to me. And I'll tell you what, it has made me think about some things too that I didn't think about during the podcast. So it's a real blessing in many ways.
Well, good. Yeah.
So,
So just talk to us if you want to talk to us. That's what
we're
we're
lonely.
saying.
We need some people to talk to us.
Yeah.
And Luke needs some stars.
So next,
give him some stars.
don't give me any stars. Next week, next time, right? We're going to attempt to release an episode on Christmas Day, and it's going to be our Christmas
What?
spectacular.
Oh, spectacular!
Spectacular.
Fa la la
We're
la
not.
la.
We're not doing a specific passage. We're going to look at the entire Christmas story, and we're going to say, okay, what are just lies that we've all been told about Christmas, about this story, that we're going to just throw out there, talk about, discuss, and maybe ruin your nativity scenes. So
Breaking up the nativity scene.
brace yourselves for a broken nativity scene. That's all I'm going to say.
That's going to be the title. Broken nativity.
Broken nativity.
That's a beautiful title. I love it so much.
Yeah. So that's our plan. So I guess read the Christmas story. I assume you're already going to be in a Christmassy kind of mood when it comes out.
Do
So
it.
that's our plan moving forward.
Fa la 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 la.